So I'm going to get started here. Thanks, everyone. My name is Joshua Case. I am a technology researcher at Berkeley Lab. You can see we got one of our Berkeley Lab colleagues here. Rhonda, good to see you. I actually spent most of my career working in the private sector. I'm a mechanical engineer by trade. I am not a commissioning engineer. I am a energy engineer, energy auditor for many years, and I worked for a long time in New York City during sort of the advent of Local Law 87, for those that are familiar with it. So did a lot of energy audits alongside commissioning professionals, retro commissioning engineers in buildings across the city. My work has spanned both that and working with large real estate clients, so helping them develop energy management plans, sustainability plans, and things like that. So I have a good amount of experience both working, in boiler rooms with engineers and in the C-suite with real estate professionals that are making a lot of the decisions around what to do with their buildings. And so I joined the lab a couple of years ago. My role at the lab is sort of around whole building energy performance and understanding where there are disconnects potentially between existing or new construction and existing building performance. That work has spanned a lot of different facets, everything from building performance standard policies through to technology implementation at the individual building level. So I'm here today to talk about one of our new programs that we started up technically a couple of years ago. We're still kind of in stealth mode about it generally, but the goal of the program overall is to try and drive more commissioning in existing buildings specifically, and then hoping to kind of expand it from there. Don't forget to check in to earn your CEUs. Here's the standard text around that in terms of your credits. I'm sure you all have seen this several times already, and our copyright materials. Just quick pulse on the room. How many of you all, show of hands, are commissioning engineers? That's what I expected. How many of you are commissioning engineers who work in existing buildings? Awesome. Do we have any researchers or people from academia here? Armando, thank you. Holding it down. Any building owners, operators? Very cool. Nice to have you here. Technology vendors. Okay. All right, so we got some small sample sizes, but we got the engineers. That's the important thing. The program that I'm going to be talking about today and some of the lessons learned around it are really about trying to bring all of those different stakeholders together. Building owners, representatives from jurisdictions and utilities, in addition to the commissioning engineers that are driving the energy performance of buildings. And just to walk quickly through what I'm planning to discuss today, I'll talk a little bit about Berkeley Lab and the great work that we've done with commissioning, most of it before my time. I can't take credit for it. Then I'll get into the Catalyzer program overall, some of the lessons we've learned from it, and then what we see as some of the new market drivers around existing building commissioning moving forward. From there, I'll get into some of our actual work with jurisdictions across the country, and we're going to be closing out with sort of more of an interactive session around something that we've been working on related to finding buildings that are ideal candidates for commissioning. This is both going to be something we hope to work with building owners on so that they can use this to decide whether they need commissioning or not, but also for providers to evaluate different buildings and their energy saving potential. So with that, I'll get into it. When I started my career, this was back 2006 through 2008, I was an engineer during the Great Recession. It was a lovely time for everyone. My work there, I worked at a center at Rutgers University doing industrial energy assessments. And at this time, it was sort of the beginning of real-time energy monitoring in buildings. We were just starting to gather data in a more real-time way. Even interval data, 15-minute data was kind of tough to find for individual buildings. But even at that point in time, I was reading papers as a geeky right out of college mechanical engineer, reading papers from authors that I am now working with at Berkeley Lab, which is really cool. It is definitely an interesting time to be getting into federally funded research right now, but our work is the sort of work that is pushing forward efficiency, cost reduction, and everything that I think crosses all sorts of different lines. LBNL's work really varies from direct products that commissioning engineers can use, like template scopes of work, to really powerful and impactful studies around the savings potential of commissioning that commissioning engineers can use to help sell their projects. Just to highlight one of those two projects, we have this sort of seminal work around the costs and benefits associated with commissioning generally. Show of hands, people in the room have seen this study before? Wow, that's great. Just from the standpoint of you all can check it out and use it. This is what we believe to be a extremely helpful resource for having that conversation with a building owner as to, am I going to have a payback on my project, one way or the other. This was around both new construction and existing building commissioning, and it was a survey of 1,500 existing and new buildings, so definitely the largest study of its kind. And a lot of it was driven through utility programs and reporting associated with utility programs. And overall, as you can see here, median 6% EUI savings, which is nothing to sneeze at. And then we did also have a bunch of buildings that we looked at outside of utility programs, so ones that didn't have incentives associated with them, and we showed a 19% median energy savings on those projects. Smaller sample size that we're dealing with there, but I think that's an important note to keep in the back of your mind as I go through the rest of the slides, because I do think it comes into play with how you look at the energy savings potential of different types of buildings in different circumstances. Also a study that we did slightly more recently around EBCx and the savings associated with that. Definitely recommend you check out both of these just in terms of pretty holistic research that was done showing really good savings, and in both of these cases, 2-year paybacks around commissioning efforts in buildings. 2-year payback is something that I've worked with a lot of different real estate clients over the years, more or less a no-brainer for most companies. Why are we not seeing more existing building commissioning, I think is the question that we're always looking to answer. This was an interesting component of that first study that I referenced that shows a little bit more of the reasoning behind why a building owner would decide to do existing building commissioning. Obtaining energy savings was the #1 response here. And you can see that reducing liability is extremely low on this list, which is an opportunity in and of itself, because I don't think real estate professionals understand the liability reduction associated with proper commissioning procedures, and then complying with existing building ordinances being the other big one here, where very few owners at the time of this study were reaching out for the purposes of any sort of compliance or performance evaluation through existing building ordinances. So this, we think, it represents a really big opportunity, and that's sort of the origin story of the commissioning catalyzer overall. The commissioning catalyzer, as I mentioned before, we started it late 2023, and the goal with the effort as of now was to drive an understanding of what's going to work with a program like this versus what might not be compatible with our approach. One of the key things that we found is that a regional approach is really important with commissioning. Just to broadly talk about the goals of the program, we call it a catalyzer because we're not necessarily looking to directly incentivize commissioning projects. We are looking to connect dots that are not being connected today. The main objective, above all else, the foundational component here is to jumpstart more EBCx projects across the US. Through that, we try to make sure that we're validating this as a win-win for industry, make sure that it's something that building owners understand all of the value props associated with it, and then help policymakers, building owners, and utility programs target the markets that are most ripe for the savings and value associated with commissioning projects. As I mentioned before, we're taking a regional approach here. Our start is really focused on regions that we actually think are slightly more mature from a commissioning perspective, so that we could gather lessons learned that we can then apply to regions that are less mature across the country. Bringing stakeholders together, distilling key gaps and opportunities, all those fun buzzwords around the ways we go about doing it. We really firmly believe that the value prop of existing building commissioning is outsized and understated. Existing building commissioning providers, we're hoping through this program, are able to just get more projects. For owners, this is about what is on the horizon in terms of performance requirements for my building, and how can a commissioning engineer fill that gap. We think this is a program valuable to utilities as well, from the standpoint of relieving stress on the grid, any sort of efficiency program and the associated value, or incentive uptake for regions that have it. And then the value for the region is sort of win-win. Build these relationships between these stakeholders and support whatever goals those jurisdictions may have. So the next section here, I am going to do a little bit of back and forth with you all. When we first came up with the Catalyzer program, we had sort of a broad brainstorming session amongst the brain trust of commissioning engineers at Berkeley Lab, and came up with a bunch of different opportunities that we thought might be powerful when it came to things that we could either dive into to do more research around or develop resources around, templates and things like that. We broke it down into a bunch of different categories, and I'm going to sort of see if you all are interested in any of these more than the other. So the first category here we have is perception-based opportunities. So I can't believe that it is 2025 and I still have to say this, but building owners do not understand the difference between commissioning and energy audits. That's something we just, I guess, got to continue to work on and figure out ways to differentiate between those. The other issue that you have with existing building commissioning projects is the savings is pretty proportional to how good the operations are in the building today. And if you are the owner of a building, you probably think that you have pretty good operations today. Or there's at least a barrier of ego there when it comes to really, understanding whether the building has that opportunity or not. More certainty in the cost benefit. So I brought those studies up before. That's general, right? You can't, any of you, go to a building and say, I will guaranteed save you 5% on your overall site UI. But we can start to get a little bit more specific when it comes to understanding what characteristics that building has today, and a range of energy saving potential based off of those characteristics. And the last piece here, identifying EBCx providers, all of you. So of these four, I'm going to go through each of them. Just raise your hand, feel free to vote if this is something that you think is relevant to a barrier to you getting more EBCx projects. First one, EBCx different than auditing. Okay, I like that there's few hands there. I don't think we can belabor that too much more 2 decades into existing building commissioning being a thing. Dealing with egos of building owners, second item. Okay, not too bad, not too bad. We're working with some owners that have some self-awareness. Certainty and cost benefit for buildings. Okay, good number of hands on that one, definitely makes sense. Identification of EBCx providers, sort of a weird one for you all to answer, but okay, we don't see that being too much of a gap. So it looks like cost benefit's the key one in this category. That's good to know. Delivery-based opportunities was the next category that we thought about and looked into a little bit. Improving the persistence of EBCx savings over time. This I would sort of couple with the general idea that we want providers to be able to draw the connection between a single one-time project and an ongoing relationship with building owners. And this applies to some of the new market drivers that I'll be getting into later. So what can we do to try to improve the persistence of savings over time? Increasing access to financial incentives, number of EBCx providers in the workforce. Is it enough to satisfy the need? This was definitely something we saw in the early days in New York City around local law 87 when they were mandating retro-commissioning. Not enough engineers to get the work done. Bridging the skills gap with operational staff, I think, is something that ties into that first objective. Can you teach as much as you are telling when it comes to opportunities at the building? And then the last item we have here is scaling our process and framework of EBCx to smaller buildings, which is always something that's been a long-term challenge, I believe. So we'll do another vote here. Persistence of savings, who thinks that's a big opportunity? Okay, couple. Access to financial incentives. Okay, a few more. Number of providers in the workforce. Okay, got a couple of people who think that's an opportunity. Bridging the gap with building staff and training. That's a pretty big one. And trying to scale down to small buildings. Okay, only a couple there as well. It's definitely a tough nut to crack, that last one, in terms of the right approach. Last one here is new product-based opportunities. So I'm going to be getting into the market drivers later here, but when we were looking at those different market drivers, we saw a lot of opportunity to sort of bring together existing building commissioning procedures with other services and tailor those services in different ways. One of those, improving technology and deployment of MBCX, coupling EBCX with energy auditing. Can you go into a building, deliver operations tune-up, while at the same time identifying longer-term retrofit opportunities? Specifying different levels of EBCX. This definitely already exists in the market between retro-commissioning and tune-ups and everything in between, but I think it could continue to be something that gets built out more. Valuing the energy co-benefits. This is definitely a big topic within research. What are the other benefits beyond the utility bill savings associated with efficiency? Delivering projects beyond HVAC, envelope lighting. I think envelope has definitely been one that's gathered a lot of steam over the past 5 or 6 years. And then trying to shorten the project timeline from start to finish, which is abstract, but something that we think could continue to improve the efficiency of projects over time. So last one here, who thinks MBCX and technology is a gap right now? Nobody. Okay, we got one. Coupling EBCX with other services, so trying to do an audit while at the same time you're doing existing building commissioning. Side question, who has done that before? Who's worked on an existing building while also doing an energy audit? Okay, a few folks have. That's good to know. Different levels of EBCX. Does this need more specification than it has today in terms of an opportunity? A couple folks. Trying to value co-benefits, health benefits, operational benefits, things like that. All right. Trying to deliver beyond HVAC to other systems. Definitely a bunch there. And trying to shorten the project timeline on commissioning projects. I think we would all love that if it was possible. Just a question of whether it is. Okay, that's great. So yeah, I think overall here I'm seeing more in terms of delivery and perception-based opportunities than product, which I think is something that makes sense to me. But yeah, we're gonna have a bit of an interactive survey later on that will get more into the weeds on some of this stuff. But that's really helpful. All right, getting into market drivers here. So, and why we're doing a regional approach to our work. We really believe that commissioning is a very regional industry, and these are sort of the drivers there around that. Labor costs vary from location to location, requirements vary, codes vary, climate zones, obviously energy costs, available incentives, all of these things are things that are pretty tailored to a region and can sometimes prevent sort of national approaches from being effective. So our plan with the Catalyzer has been to start working with regions. Again, I mentioned before, more mature regions for now, and then moving into less mature regions as we go to drive progress. ID where there's opportunities for third parties to step in and support, help fill those gaps as best as we can, promote the successes, and if there are lessons learned, make sure that we're bringing those to other regions across the US. So that's sort of the program as it stands right now in a nutshell. The next section here, I'm going to be getting into sort of some of the reasons why this Catalyzer program was brought into place to begin with, and some of the things that we see on the horizon with new opportunities. I break it down into 4 different categories here. They're somewhat interlinked, but they each have sort of their distinct dynamics associated with them. And this is, all of these are really from the perspective of commercial real estate. The same sort of concepts do apply with other property types. They do apply with other stakeholders, but if you're trying to drive real estate companies to invest in their buildings with existing building commissioning, you have to appeal to what drives real estate professionals in their decision-making processes. So international investment, universal performance frameworks, regional performance frameworks, and financial risk assessments. Seeing at least a few eyes glazed over in the audience after saying those things, but hopefully as I walk through these, it won't be as much of an issue. So first, international investment community. So when I was working in consulting for real estate, probably in the 2015, 2016 timeframe, we had a lot of clients that all of the sudden started asking us about this platform called CREM. Has anyone here heard of CREM, the platform, C-R-R-E-M? Yep, that was me too when I first was hearing about it from my clients. It's a tool, CREM, the acronym stands for Commercial Real Estate Risk Assessment Monitor. It is a European framework for decarbonization of commercial buildings. The general idea is that it is built around a 2050 target for net zero carbon emissions and what individual buildings need to do to be in compliance with that 2050 target. Presentation we just had before this one was around net zero buildings in this room. That's sort of the end goal of the CREM process, would be to drive buildings towards net zero, but it also defines a pathway along the way. And so our clients were asking us about it. We didn't understand why at first. We looked into the program further. We talked to our clients about it. Essentially, pretty large investors, institutional investors, and sovereign wealth funds throughout Europe, in particular Norges, which is the sovereign wealth fund of Norway, essentially announced that they were not going to invest in buildings unless they were evaluated relative to the CREM pathways. So something that really, CREM started as a university project that was funded by the EU, but they went from being a university-funded project to being an international standard that everyone was using to evaluate buildings and hopefully to drive investment. If I'm an owner of a building in the US, I want investment from wherever I can get it, and so this became a very important thing to building owners. So that's the investment side. I think this is probably one you all are most familiar with. In particular, prescriptive requirements that have existed within LEED, BREEAM, and others. The note I'll make here, why I put in new market drivers, is there is a move towards performance and existing building-related certification. So LEED, Performance Score, BREEAM in use. Yeah, these are not about checking boxes anymore. They are about monitoring performance over time and giving ratings to buildings over time. So this is another big driver for commercial real estate. Regional performance requirements are another big driver. Anyone who saw me speak last year at CX Energy, I was really focused in on this category, in particular building performance standards. Does anyone in here, show of hands, know what a BPS or a building performance standard is? Okay, we got a few. So we had some impact from the session last time. Building performance standards are real regulatory mechanisms that exist across the country that have been popping up around performance targets for buildings. They could be GHG performance targets, they can be energy performance targets. A lot of the BPS policies are EUI based, but they are levying real fines on buildings that do not meet this minimum level of performance. Think of it as a outcome-based code. Code where every single year you're reporting in your building's whole building energy consumption, and if you are over a target with these policies, you are subject to financial penalties. This was something that actually got a lot of its sort of base support during the first Trump administration, sort of a response to things not happening as much at the federal level. States, cities, and counties decided they were going to try and do it themselves, build out their own climate action plans or energy reduction plans. And one of the mechanisms that they put in place to try to drive that performance was building performance standards. Right now, of the cities, counties, and states that have considered BPS policies, it covers about a quarter of the commercial square footage across the US. So this is not a small potatoes amount of square footage that we're talking here. They are unfortunately pretty varied in their structure. It's part of the problem with being more of a grassroots approach to BPS policies. This is actually the first year of compliance within New York City and for a lot of buildings within DC's ordinance as well. So we see this as a really huge opportunity for commissioning providers to be the tip of the spear, as we like to call it, with a building. So I'm a building, I'm subject to an ordinance, I don't know what to do. First thing I should probably do, get my building retro commissioned, get my building tuned up. And then from there, you could start looking at bigger investments if they're needed. Also a great opportunity for longer term relationships with building owners because they have to maintain those operations every year moving forward. And then the last piece here, financial risk assessment being something that drives a lot of commercial real estate decision making. We're working on a parallel project right now with the Fisher Center for Real Estate out in Berkeley, built around the idea of how energy performance affects financial risk. One of those risks is things like building performance standards. Another is energy cost volatility. Folks remember I think it was 2016, the polar vortex that hit the Northeast? Is anyone working in the Northeast during that period of time? No? Okay. Well, let me tell you, it was very cold. One of the issues that was a follow-on to the polar vortex hitting was natural gas pipeline constraints coming to the New York City, New Jersey area. Those constraints, because when it gets that cold, it's hard to get natural gas at volume to where it needs to go. There was a 1.5 month spike in electricity prices. Commercial clients, including some of my own clients, who normally would have a $2,000 a month utility bill, suddenly had a $20,000 a month bill that month. They were not happy with me as their energy advisor, even though I wasn't necessarily involved with their decision making around that. That was definitely something that was a shock to the system for a lot of building owners. This sort of thing can happen. There's a lot of things that can affect energy, and the bigger you get with buildings, the closer you are to wholesale markets in terms of that volatility. And so anything that you could do to reduce your consumption on an annual basis is not just saving you money on your bill, it is also reducing the risk of that sort of event happening and it being catastrophic for your building or for your business. So those are kind of the four key areas that we've seen as new market drivers of EBCx moving forward. What do these things have in common across all of them? First, there's a baseline level of performance, and then there's some measure of increased performance over time. So that level of increased performance takes a number of different forms. It could be an absolute performance target, which is the case of most BPS policies. It could be a relative performance target. I have to reduce X amount over a certain period of time. There could be a score that you need to hit one way or the other. Buildings in New York City right now have energy letter grades on the front of their building. So in the same way you have like a health grade in front of a restaurant, you also have a A through D score on the energy efficiency of your building. These things drive people to action more than you might think. But all of these things, when you get rid of the specifics, are just about driving actual real performance in buildings over time, and measurement of that performance over time. How do you get real performance in buildings? There's two components to it, and both are critical. You can't have one without the other and drive real energy performance. The first is design performance, which I will not belabor here, but you have system designs from a leaky building to a well-sealed building. You have efficient systems versus inefficient systems, old systems versus new. Design performance is one of the key factors. But the other dimension that's often overlooked is the operational performance of the building. So a lot of buildings that I was working with in New York City were far at the left side of this chart, where they were just trying to keep the lights on and keep tenants happy. There's a whole spectrum here that you all sort of serve as the conduit to driving real operational performance in an ongoing basis over time. So if you take these two as sort of different dimensions and you put them over each other, you end up with what you actually need to get to a high performance building over time, which is both efficient design and strong operations of the building. If you have an efficient design, but you have poor operations, you should look at commissioning. Vice versa, if you have really good operations, but you're doing it with a leaky building, the next thing you have to look at there is an investment around some sort of retrofit at the building itself. This is one of the ways to look at how a building might shift over time. So if you have a major retrofit of a building, you don't have commissioning associated with it, you're not actually going to get better performance. You're not going to move into that upper right quadrant. You're just going to end up needing something different, which is the commissioning efforts that are needed to, again, get a building into compliance. I stole this chart from Institute for Market Transformation around some work they did on BPS policies. This shows a building life cycle and some of the key upgrades along the way. It's kind of hard to see, but it's lighting upgrade, building tune-up in the upper left there, all the way through to mechanical upgrades and envelope upgrades. We really see commissioning fitting in at all of these different stages, the different forms of commissioning fitting in at the different stages. Hopefully, again, getting to that point of OCX, MBCX as a long-term engagement with real estate operators. Another way to look at sort of quantifying the market value here and those new market drivers is analysis that we do at the stock level, at the building stock level around building energy performance. So my team of researchers takes in pretty basic information about a region or an organization or a portfolio, really just benchmarking data. We then apply whatever performance framework are needed to get to the target that's being hit, and then we look at what are the gaps there and what are the costs associated with those gaps. End up with a future stock and energy savings associated with that. And if you do this over enough buildings, you see some interesting things when it comes to the types of buildings. This is kind of an abstract chart to to read, but I'll try and do my best to explain it. So this is a histogram where the y-axis here is the number of buildings. And then each of the three charts, each of the three histograms is a different period of time. So you have three different performance targets here, as I mentioned before, getting incrementally more stringent over the time period. And then the x-axis on the histogram is the amount of savings that are needed at each building. So you could see if I can get the laser pointer working here. You could see that in this first period, this is the number of buildings already in compliance. This is the vast number of buildings that need a small amount of energy savings, in this case natural gas. And then there's going to be some buildings that need more than that over time. The goal would be to have as many buildings in this first bucket as possible when you're trying to build out a broad energy reduction strategy across thousands of buildings, or hundreds of buildings, or tens of buildings for that matter. If you do this across a few different BPS regions, and I presented this at my talk last year, there are a lot of buildings that can get into compliance with BPS policies. And I think this applies to those other market drivers as well, with less than the 6% savings that's the median savings associated with existing building commissioning. So these are three different regions where a lot of these buildings are an immediate market opportunity for existing building commissioning over time. My next section here, I'm going to get into a roundtable discussion that we had last year. This roundtable, and I hope that some of you out there were maybe a part of it, but if not, we'll be doing more of these moving forward. We wanted to connect with providers across the country, and we had about 30 commissioning engineers covering 6 different market regions across the US, and just talking through what are the opportunities and barriers associated with existing building commissioning. Where are things today and where could they go? We wanted to vet the concept of our catalyzer with folks who wanted to see what those barriers were and try and drive EBCx at scale. We got into some interesting discussions there. I'm going to talk through kind of the main takeaways of that, just as food for thought for you all. One, again, hate to belabor it, but people still don't know what it is and the value prop associated with it. People think energy audits and EBCx are the same thing. We need to continue to work on that. A need for more qualified EBCx providers in terms of focus areas. So in particular, I think the biggest gap that was raised was around smaller buildings. When I say smaller buildings, I mean in like the 25 to 75,000 square foot range. And I get it from, as a former provider, the bigger the building is you're working with, probably the more economical that project is going to be. It's not easy to deal with a large portfolio, high count of smaller buildings unless you have some really strong procedures in place. But that's something that remains kind of an opportunity for scaling EBCx, as hitting that tranche of smaller buildings. Next couple of items here, energy performance evaluation. We did validate that this is driving the demand for EBCx. There are opportunities to deliver deeper value. We did see some hands up when I mentioned before, trying to tie together EBCx with other opportunities at the building. If you're going in there and you're surveying the equipment condition and you're looking at the operations and you're looking at the control sequences, you're gathering a lot of information about a building that could then be used to potentially set that building up for a major retrofit in the future, or an electrification project, or just a major efficiency project. Trying to draw those links and see if there's opportunity there to couple these things over time. In terms of the best strategy for a building, every building is a snowflake. We talk about in the existing building world. Finding ways to adapt your process to different buildings is important. And then education and outreach, tied again back to that previous point. You want to build confidence amongst decision makers that this is going to be a shoo-in investment for your building. Another, in terms of just additional insights that we got from the effort, engaging the operators in the EBCx process, I will say, is always going to be a challenge. You're always kind of in a spot where you're telling someone what they're doing wrong fundamentally, and that can be a hard relationship to maintain. I think you all know that there's as much art as there is science to that, but I will say that with retrocommissioning projects I was involved with directly, once New York City had passed its building performance standard, it was a very different conversation that we were having with operators of buildings relative to before. In the before times, when it was just retrocommissioning was the thing that they were required to do, they were just checking a box. Right? Whatever we told them they had to do, they did exactly that, and then they wanted us out of there as quickly as they could get us out. Not always, some of them were nicer than others, but you know how it is. When we had this specter, this fear within real estate of this building performance standard, it wasn't even really specified yet or quantified yet in terms of the details of it, the engineers at the building were like, okay, I really do need to care about this. This is something that is going to, put my building in a position where I'm either in or out of compliance on an annual basis. And I think that's one of the real opportunities that exists, right, is if there is this external force that's driving, requirements around energy performance, you are more on the same team as the engineer at the building as a commissioning provider. And that also ties to the shift towards ongoing commissioning, right? If we're all confident in the work that we do, we want to see those savings, and we want to see those savings maintained over time. Scaling to smaller buildings remains an issue, and right now we're not seeing a big connection between the average building that's looking at a international investor's performance framework, or a BREEAM in-use score, or a building performance standard, and EBCx as one of the real key mechanisms to drive that initial pass at performance. One of the things that ties in with the smaller buildings piece, which I'll note quickly, is buildings that haven't had efficiency applied to them over time, buildings that have been underserved by the efficiency industry, are, because they have been underserved, the buildings that have the biggest opportunities available right now. The fruit is lowest on the trees that haven't been picked yet. So we do see, even though sometimes smaller buildings are difficult from the standpoint of administration and management, there could be some really big savings opportunities at those buildings, because really a lot of the industry has not been looking at them over time. All right, from here I'm going to get into regional engagements. How am I doing time-wise? Okay, I'm 45 minutes in. All right, I'm going to breeze through this next section, and then I'll get into the Q&A from here. These are the things that we've been doing so far in terms of just types of engagements that we have: building informational resources, working with utilities to help them craft their EBCx incentives, tailored offerings for EBCx, decision frameworks, and finding ways to just promote successful projects wherever possible. These are the groups that we have been working with so far. This last one within the Midwest is coming soon. We have not started our engagement there, but we've gotten interest from these folks on that being our next target region. And yeah, these first two, Pacific Northwest, Mid-Atlantic, pretty mature regions from an existing building commissioning perspective, and also both areas that have building performance standards in place or on the way. We did some really interesting work with Seattle around their tune-ups program. So Seattle had a mandated tune-ups initiative for larger buildings, requiring all existing buildings to get this tune-up done. They then had a lot of really good data on those buildings, and we were able to look at that data and see, hey, did these tune-ups make a difference? And thankfully, we did find that they did make a difference. Yes? It should all be available, yeah. And if you can't find it, you can shoot me an email. I have my email on the last slide. Yeah, this one might be harder to Google because it's under a paper called A Tale of Three Cities that one of my researchers put together. right before my time. But yeah, we did look at this data as part of that study. Yeah, so I'll have my email at the end, and you could definitely reach out if you want me to point you towards any of these specific resources. So this was interesting both in terms of the site savings, but also in terms of the fact that 34% of buildings did actually increase their energy use after the tune-up, which is a bit of a surprising finding. But I think when you think about buildings, especially if it's a mandate, literally every building of a certain size was getting these commissioning projects done. You're dealing with some buildings that probably have inoperable equipment. You're dealing with some buildings that their outdoor air damper's been stuck closed for the past 3 years. These sort of things are not energy savings opportunities, but they are liability reduction opportunities, right? That outside air damper being closed is a problem that is looming regardless of whether you know about it or not. Doing some great work with Seattle City Light right now. We're actually, in a couple of weeks, having a building owner workshop there where they're going to be talking through the Washington State Building Performance Standard and how existing building commissioning is going to be a key tool in the toolkit of things for building owners. We're doing some great work with Montgomery County. They're definitely at the forefront of trying to drive existing building efficiency. In particular, their Green Bank is doing some really interesting things and work. So anyone who is working in that region, I definitely recommend you connect with me or connect with the Green Bank directly to talk about opportunities that exist there. And then I'm breezing through all of that just time-wise so that I can get to our last section around decision guidance for building owners. I think you all get the base concept here, which is if you could go to a building and ask that building 5 questions, 10 questions, and you could do that across a whole bunch of different buildings. How could you use those answers to define which building you want to go into and do existing building commissioning at? So as a starting point for this research, we surveyed every utility program we could find for existing building commissioning. You don't need to read the details here, just know that we did the work. Each of these utilities essentially had different resources associated with their programs, and that those resources show what types of buildings are good fits for our utility program. We itemized all of that and we looked at it sort of across the board, categorized the different questions that the programs were asking. We also looked at different commissioning guidelines that existed to see what they were recommending as different things to look at for ripe opportunities for existing building commissioning. And we were able to take all of that data and consolidate down sort of the different questions that we would want to be asking about buildings. And our plan is to turn this into a decision guidance framework. So something that gives a building more or less a score that says this building is a really great candidate for EBCx or maybe not the best candidate for EBCx. A building that's about to have a gut renovation next year is probably not the best candidate for a long-term EBCx initiative. And then we're looking at this both in terms of technical suitability, which we define as what is the energy saving potential of the project, and then economic suitability, which would be what drives the ROI of the building. Obviously, energy savings drives ROI, but think of economic suitability as what are your energy rates? What is the cost of a commissioning project in your region? What is the incentive that's available to offset the initial cost of that commissioning? And so with those 2 dimensions in mind, I'm going to ask that everyone in the room either try to scan this QR code, or you can go to menti.com and use that code. And we're going to be just asking and answering a few questions related to those things that we were looking into. So we know, the questions that utility programs are asking. We know the questions that commissioning guidelines are recommending that people ask. What we don't necessarily know as well is how important are each of those things relative to each other. So we're analyzing that in a number of different ways, and you are now officially part of the experiment. So let's see if I can make this thing work. You all see a screen? Anyone having issues? Okay. Okay, that's fine. That's what you should see. Yeah. The QR code should have the code in it. Yeah. All right. Cool. So we're going to start with just filling in what our audience is here today. So take a look at your phone. You should have a question that poses which one of these you are. I see you, Armando, academic researcher. Very cool. As expected, plenty of engineers in the room. For those who put other, do you want to say who you are or what you are a part of? Anyone? Okay. We'll just leave these as mystery folk within the... Oh, we got one.
Hi, my name is Alok Kumar. Thank you for your presentation. Couple of questions. So when it comes to healthcare facilities, does LBNL or somebody in the government, DOE, kind of track like hospitals that do EBCx and put their energy savings and all of that, yeah, MNV and stuff like that? Is that something available that you can learn from and maybe educate other DoD healthcare facility folks?
Sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. For the purpose of this survey, I'm going to move to the next question so you all can answer while I answer your question here in real time. So this is just two, energy savings versus operational improvement. What's the biggest driver? So thanks for the question around healthcare and associated savings. I would start by taking a look at the study I cited at the beginning around the costs and benefits of commissioning generally. I don't know off the top of my head whether healthcare was one of the crosstabs there. If it isn't, it's something we may be able to talk to you all about in terms of looking at the raw data that we have. Because yeah, we did look at programs that did include healthcare facilities. It's just a matter of whether it was split out or not. Okay, and this is interesting. We're seeing pretty even between the two, which I wasn't sure which way it would go. I guess relative to our initial study, it was much more in the energy savings direction, but yeah, I think both are certainly critical. Give another couple seconds here, and then we'll move on to the next one. This is the one I'm most interested to see, these next couple of questions. So again, as I framed this before, you go into a building and you learn these few things about the building. You understand the age, condition of the existing equipment, maybe you understand whether it has a building automation system or not, would be that second category. You know whether the type of building, obviously, and you know a little bit about their existing PM procedures. Which one of those do you think is going to drive performance of the study overall? Controls, capability, and sub seems to be winning. Okay. And age of equipment as well. Existing procedures making a late run at it. This is very interesting. Anyone want to speak to or comment on their thoughts on this one?
My reaction, sorry, I didn't mean to yell. My reaction is, well, it's like you picked the 4 best ones, so they're all 10s.
That's fair, yeah. I think even at that top tier, we want to make sure we understand a little of the nuance there, so this is helpful.
On the age of the equipment,
yep.
Really, if you've got newer equipment, it's a better opportunity for existing building because you're going to have more modern controls that you can do something with. A lot of older equipment
yep.
Needs to be changed out instead of tweaked.
Not much you can do there, yeah.
But we have had good success. I mean, we did an old hospital that had a bunch of old equipment. Half of it was pneumatic, and cut their energy consumption by 30% 2 years ago.
That's amazing. Yeah, love to learn more about that. And yeah, such a good point in terms of both opportunity with better controls, but also the number of buildings I would audit that had brand new control systems that were being used really poorly because it was an old operator who was used to their old pneumatics was definitely an issue.
I would also comment and just talk about the age of equipment. I think that's most easily palatable for an owner to like understand. You know, if they talk about like maintenance procedures or control capabilities, they might get a little bit more defensive. But age of equipment's like a more definitive thing they can understand because, you know, they have equipment at home that needs to be replaced, refrigerator, you know, dishwasher and stuff that you can easily say like, look, 15 years old, start replacing it. So that one I think will also get the most action from them.
Right, yeah, it's intuitive for a building owner, which is super important. It's a really good point, thank you. All right, next one, we're going to talk about human factors a little bit here. So same concept, but more about the operations staff that we're dealing with here. Another way of framing this is if you could only ask one of these questions to a building, which one would you use to best define the opportunity? I think I had PM procedures on both of these because it can both be written down and it can be what's actually happening at the building is the differentiator there. Okay. Existing PM. This is great. Awesome. Interest of time, I'm going to hop on to the next one here. Which is a client that is most likely to work with you? One that has high energy costs, one that has an available utility incentive, or a building that has a annoying flagship tenant? Okay, high energy rate seems to be taking it. And a lot of yes and with these. Which is good. It shows that we're moving in the right direction with our suggestions. Awesome. Interest of time, I'm going to move on to this last one, which is just an opportunity for you all to talk about maybe some of the things that we did not talk about today. So purely optional, but if there is something that I did not mention and you're sitting there stewing, thinking you're trying to make more of these projects, but you didn't think about this thing, this would be the place to write it down. Amount of outside air required. It's a very good point. I do some work with lab efficiency and lab efficiency scoring, and that's obviously a huge, huge part of the process. None. Thank you for whomever put none. It just shows we hit it all. Yes. I think we have someone in the back there raising their hand.
Yeah, thank you.
these are great.
I mean, I was going to add like design criteria. So sometimes what happens is you design a building 30 years ago, and then all of a sudden, let's say hospitals, air changes, criteria has changed, right? So you basically go back, right, and you design the new systems for a criteria change. You know, maybe a dew point set, set point or whatever, air changes per hour and stuff like that. So. So I have a question. So the data you're collecting today, are you going to use it for some further research on this?
Yeah, so our goal is to produce a decision guidance framework. So one that a jurisdiction can use to put out as part of their building performance policy, a utility could use as part of their incentive program, but also for commissioning providers to use. It's probably a 1 to 1.5 year effort to get this together, but yeah, that's the.
So are you going to publish that, or?
Yes, that would be the goal.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks everyone for joining, and apologies for going over time. These are all super great. I'll be here if anyone.